Well, hello and welcome from wherever you are watching. Welcome to Creation Conversations. We have a good part of the team here today, though we are missing Joe, who is on his travels in the US. We will hear more about what Joe's been up to or is up to right now a bit later on. But welcome. We've got Diane from Australia. We've got Craig and we've got John. It's very much an Australian theme today. Sam is also there as well, helping us in the background, but we are going to be hearing a lot about our theme today, which is Babel to Brisbane. So a very Australian theme, but obviously creation theme, and we'll be hearing lots of different things. But Craig has been on his journeys a little bit again, and Craig, you're just going to share a little bit about that, and also share a video that that didn't work the other week when we did a live stream 2 weeks ago. We had a number of videos, and one of the videos didn't work, so we're going to show that as well. So Craig will introduce that. So over to you, Craig, to share.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. If you just may as well put my slides up, just a couple of minutes on what I was up to today. It might interest a few of our viewers. Down here in the southern end of Down Under in Tasmania, we have the world famous Cradle Mountain World Heritage Area, which, by the way, the World Heritage Area covers about 25% of the state. So it's one of the biggest World Heritage areas in the world. And also there's certain criteria you have to meet to become a World Heritage Area. In most places, the criteria, there's maybe one, maybe two, maybe three, but the Cradle Mountain World Heritage Area meets 7 out of the 10 criteria. So it's right up there in terms of the World Heritage importance. It's a beautiful area. So there's a look at Dove Lake in the distance, Lake Lilla in the front. I was up there with a school group from the local Christian school, and it was great to get up there and have a look at a few of the sites. Some of the things that it's reserving is Eucalyptus coccifera is one of them. It's endemic to Tasmania. It means it only occurs here. We've got the tallest eucalypt and, in fact, tallest flowering plant in the world, Eucalyptus regnans, but we've also got the shortest, which just shows you how environment impacts things. And this is my daughter standing next to Eucalyptus coccifera, the shortest eucalypt. It's also got Nothofagus gunnii, which is a type of fagus, I suppose, a myrtle, but it's endemic again to Tassie. It's only found here. It's one that loses its leaves in winter. It's deciduous. We've got celery top pine, which that's a pine tree, believe it or not. That's the leaf of the pine tree, and it's given obviously the name celery top because its leaf looks very much like celery. And that's also endemic to Tassie. These button grass plains are not endemic to Tassie so much. You can also find them in Victoria and New South Wales, but they're vast in Tasmania, and it's a sort of habitat that things like wombats really love. And snakes, by the way. But not today. You can see the weather there wasn't great for snakes, although I did see one on the way home, coming home today. So, yeah, beautiful scenery, lots of highland lakes. It's a glacial environment as well in the past. No glaciers in Tasmania anymore, but certainly have been there in the past. So that's just a little bit of God's beauty in creation for you to enjoy. But Steve, maybe back to you, and if we're going to play the video, if now's the time.
Great. Craig, do you want to just introduce the video, because it's slightly off topic of what we're doing today, but obviously we're going back to it from 2 weeks ago. Just share a little bit to preview.
Yeah, sure. So when Diane came down, we were showing a few videos that we did, and one of the ones that we did but we couldn't play last week due to some technical difficulties was one on one of the fossils that Diane had brought all the way from UK, which had come from the USA anyway. The video sort of explained that, but a couple of other fossils that we've got into the museum as well. So, well, Diane, it's been a long time in the making, but we got you here finally, and you've got something to give me.
Yes, I have. It's very exciting, and it's just been on the last leg of its journey. So here it is.
Fantastic. It's finally great to have it. It's been 18 months in the making, all the way from where?
Well, I bought it from the UK, from Oswestry near Wales to Canberra, but that wasn't the beginning of its journey. This is a fossil, of course, and it was originally dug up in Germany, and it made its way, with a little bit of help, to the USA, where one of our colleagues, Joseph Hubbard, who leads the UK Ministry of Creation Research, he went to the USA and he collected it from there. So he took it from the USA.
From Glenn Wilson.
From Glenn Wilson,
Yeah.
That's right. And another one of our colleagues who looks after the USA part of the ministry. They acquired this legally, of course, and Joseph took it back to the UK, and there it sat in his museum until I turned up in the UK, and I took it from the UK, from Oswestry to Canberra, and now it's just been on its last journey from Canberra to Launceston to Beauty Point.
And Joseph's still talking to you?
He is indeed.
Oh, he is, yeah. No, it's good of him to look after it for us. Okay, now you hold that for a second. You got that?
Yes.
Now, just happened to get one of these dragonflies out on the wharf right out the front of the Creation Discovery Centre the other day. So a modern dragonfly from this area, and we can sit that right next to it there and get a bit of an idea of the difference in sizes of those. We do get some big ones still on the planet today, not quite as big as this one, close, but the biggest ones are up to 70 centimetres in wingspan. They're massive, and that's telling us something about the world.
Yes, the world has certainly changed, but it hasn't evolved. This one is about 18 centimetres across, which is bigger than the almost all of the living ones. I think 15 centimetres is about the record for living ones now. Yes, 70 centimetres, that really is enormous, and an insect that size with these kind of wings would not have been able to live in our present environment. So something has to have changed.
Great. Well, you put that one down carefully, and I'll just grab another fossil that we've got in that has a similar idea to that. Now, do you know much about this one?
These are some scutes from a Sarcosuchus, and I think we have one tooth of that as well.
Yes, we do. I'll grab that just in a second. So now these are the scales. How do these compare to modern crocodile scales?
Well, they're much bigger for a start. I mean, this one is just in pieces, so that's not even the entire segment or the entire scute or scale, which is like a big bony scale. So again, we've got change, but we haven't got evolution.
That's correct. And this one's come from all the way originally from Africa via Canada from one of our colleagues over there, and it's great to have it in our museum. But we're going to put that next to a tooth that also came from Niger. So this is a Sarcosuchus tooth, and do you know how that one compares to a modern crocodile?
Well, again, it's bigger, and we don't quite have its tip there, but it's certainly big and sharp. I wouldn't like to get in the way of it.
Now I'm going to test you out. Do you know how big the Sarcosuchus could get?
No, I don't actually.
Oh, I've got you. I finally stumped Diane. There you go. Fantastic. Well, I have researched it, and
Yes.
they're known in the fossil record up to 40 foot long.
Wow.
So that's a huge crocodile, and it's telling us something again.
Again, the world has changed, but it hasn't evolved. Things used to be bigger in the past, now they are smaller, and a lot of things have died out. So there's been huge amounts of change, but none of it's evolution. In fact, it's the very opposite. We've gone from a world where there were more creatures and bigger creatures to a world where things have either shrunk or they've died out. So that's the very opposite of evolution.
Yeah, fantastic. And behind us, we've got a gharial fossil.
Yes.
A gharial is a crocodile that still lives today on the Indian subcontinent.
Yes, they live throughout Asia as a crocodile-like creature with a very long, thin snout, and in fact we've got a nice illustration of it here. Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. So the world has changed, but it's been going downhill.
Great. Thank you very much for producing that, Craig and Diane. It's great. Any other comments on that? Any other questions anyone wants to make on the devolution of crocodiles?
Craig, you also have a present day gharial, the one with the really long snout. Do you?
Yeah, so we've got a model skull of that as well. Yeah, underneath that wasn't showed on the actual video, but they're exactly the same. So they haven't changed from the fossil record. You can see all the features that they've got. So any degeneration that they had seems to have been before the flood. Interestingly,
so it's a degeneration of size, largely.
It seems to be. Well, they're still pretty big, the gharial crocodiles in India. Yeah, there's some smaller ones in the sort of Malaysian, Indonesian sort of areas. Yeah. But the ones in India are still pretty big crocs.
Right. So Sarcosuchus then is some kind of crocodile, because you forgot to tell us, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's a giant croc. That's for sure.
Yeah, very good. Giant at 10 and a half, 12 meters long. That's big enough.
But maybe not.
Yeah, you said it was the largest would be 40 foot. No, 40 foot. What kind of, for people to understand, okay, you might understand what 40 foot is, but is there an animal today that is 40 foot long, that big, that you could think, okay, a crocodile would be this big?
Well, it's
no.
It's probably twice, bit over twice the length of the biggest crocodiles alive today. The biggest ones might be 6 meters. These are about 13 meters.
Wow.
Huge.
It's the equivalent of the length of a whale shark.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Not a lot of us see those in the sea either, but thankfully. All right, great. So we mentioned earlier that Joseph Hubbard is in the States. So for him, it would be, I think it's something like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So that's why the time that we would be running this live, it's not able to join us. So, but he's been busy, and I haven't heard a lot from him. But John, you have been speaking to him quite a number of times while he's been away. So what's Joe been up to?
I spoke to him at Australia 2 a.m. this morning, because I figured he'd be getting out of bed, at least having a day off and things like that today, because it's Monday over there for him. But he did report that he's found a great new fossil. They had a field trip on Saturday. They had 3 churches on Sunday, and all the ministry's gone well. He's really over there, for those of you who don't know, as part of his university program, he's doing a paper at a conference, right? But we won't be talking too much about that tonight. But he went out and found a field trip. Let me just hold one of the fossils up close. Can you see those nice little black stripes there? We've talked about these before. They are fossil thorns, a little plant called Sordonia. And we have entered into debate with the evolutionary establishment, because this rock here is Ordovician. By definition, it's on the maps of Tennessee marked as Ordovician. And yet all the professors say there were no Sordonia plants. They didn't evolve until the late Silurian, early Devonian. And it's really interesting to note that not only did Joe find more of these, he found better ones than even John Mackay found at that site. Yes, I did show him where the site was, and we've got some great ones there. But the good news is, and it's part of the benefit of having a share team around the globe, I told Joe, get a specimen for each of our museums, a good specimen. And so he will be now transporting that By the way, just up the road from this site, you remember Al Gore? That's where his family property is, not far away from Fossil Thorns. You can make of that what you will. But Joe will be bringing those thorns back to England, and I'm sure the customs agents are getting very familiar with our strange luggage collection. Sir, you have rocks in your suitcase. Sir, you have bones in your briefcase. Yes, been there, done that. But Joe will bring them back to England because in a little while, Diane will be over in England again. And so those of you who know Diane and want her, just get in touch with Joe and the family. And then Diane is becoming known as Fossil Courier Di, right? She will be bringing all the dead things across in her luggage, probably the hand luggage this time, because the specimens are not all that huge, but they are the best on the planet. And Creation Research has the world record on the oldest alleged, this is in the evolutionary scale, the oldest alleged fossil thorns. And again, I'll make the point, where you find fossil thorny plants, they only occurred after Adam sinned. So this rock, which is full of fossil thorny plants, did not form until after Adam sinned. Can you see why creation research can be sometimes very unpopular? Because the interesting thing is the evolutionist at the very most, at the very least, wants these to be hundreds of millions of years old. In reality, that rock was not here when Adam walked on the earth. It only formed after Adam's sin. And the size of the Ordovician rocks is global. I've been on them all over the planet. Get our DVD, with Darwin, and you'll find that we take you from place to place all across the globe and show you how these rocks are just almost universal. So that's what Joe's been doing. Very successful. Keep praying for him and keep praying for his wife, Sarah Ann, and their lovely baby, Charlotte. So back to you, Steve.
Great, thanks, John. So we're going to do the headlines now. So this is a feature that we've been doing where we share some of the news headlines that come up and give our biblical worldview take on the news, so we can see the truth through the headlines. And Diane is up to do that today. So we'll get Diane ready on the screen, and we'll do our headlines this week.
This week, and we start with a fossil of a giant flying squirrel. It was found amongst a mass of other large fossils, including red pandas, rhinos, a mastodon, and the world's largest collection of tapir fossils. Now, the squirrel was about the size of a cat. That might not sound very big, but it is 3 times the size of a present-day grey squirrel, so you wouldn't want it gliding in to steal the nuts from your garden bird feeder, as squirrels are wont to do. I have actually seen that. But scientists have identified it as belonging to a genus of extinct squirrels so far only found in Asia. They suggested that the squirrels migrated to America across the Bering Straits when sea levels were lower, but they eventually died out along with lots of other large animals. Now, this fits with the biblical history of animals, where they dispersed after Noah's flood. They died out as the environment degenerated. These fossils are more evidence that the world is not evolving upwards, but has been going downhill ever since the original good creation was ruined due to human sin and God's judgment. Now to something smaller flying creatures, hummingbirds. Now these colourful nectar-feeding birds are tiny and delicate, but they are very aggressive and territorial, and they will actually dive bomb and fight off other members of their own species who move into their patch. And therefore, scientists in Ecuador were surprised to find 23 adult birds of the same species nesting and roosting together in the same cave. The cave was in a high altitude region with a harsh climate where nectar-producing flowers are fairly scarce. The scientists suggested that the difficult environment promoted the evolution of social traits. However, as Darwin himself described it, evolution is a process of struggle and the war of nature. It's more likely that the cooperative behavior is the remnant of the original good world, and the ability to live together in peace was already present and has enabled these birds to survive. A good reminder that the kingdom of God works on cooperation, not struggle and competition. And finally, we move to another group of cooperative animals, this time in the ocean. Scientists have used drones to observe the behavior of narwhals. These are whales that have a distinctive long spiral tusk. Now, the structure of the tusk has been thoroughly studied, but little is known about how the whales use them in the wild. A study of narwhals in the Canadian Arctic found that the animals used their tusks in many different behaviors, including exploring, foraging, communication, social learning, and even play. Now, the idea that animals may play might seem bizarre, but observations of deliberate, repeated, non-aggressive behavior with no obvious function has been observed in a number of animals, including elephants and apes. It also may be that narwhals are one of the large animals that the writer of Psalm 104 referred to as being made to play in the sea, to the delight of the creator of all life, and he doesn't need drones to watch them. And that's it for Creation Headlines this week.
Okay. Back to me, Steve, if you
Great.
like. I'll introduce the subject and you can bring us a reading before we have a second patch from Diane in our first Q&A time.
Can I ask a question? Can I
Sure,
ask a
you
question, John?
Yeah.
Just on the creation conversation. The things moving from Asia across the Bering Strait into
Yes.
North America, how come it's always that way? As far as I've ever heard, there's never any movement of creatures that are supposedly might have evolved in the Americas, back the other way.
Perhaps because the creatures started on a big boat in the Middle East and that was the best way to go.
Precisely. So if evolution were to be true, you'd think something would have evolved in the Americas and would have moved backwards towards the west. But that's not what anyone believes.
Good point, Craig.
Good point, Craig.
Yeah. Let me just introduce a couple of things before we have our biblical framework. I have here a beautiful basket, Aboriginal basket, made of lawyer cane. It used to be complete. It's over 100 years old, so don't be surprised. It's held up with handmade Aboriginal string, and they used to use these only in a small portion of North Australia, where my uncle used to own a big cane farm, and the Aborigines would live down in the bush at the bottom in their humpies or whatever you wanted to call them down there. So I got to know them quite well, but this didn't come from those Aborigines. This came only from one section of North Queensland, and it's now disappeared totally. It was found by a man 100 years ago, was donated to us for our museum on Sunday after we had our young Josiah talking on victory over the serpent. And it was really great to receive yet more gifts. But tonight's program, to get you thinking behind the scenes, is not just about Aboriginal baskets, it's also about this gift. Now, do you recognise what this is? That's a clay pot. Aborigines had lawyer cane baskets, and the people in New Guinea had clay pots with very nice decoration on. Now, we'll be talking about from Babel to Brisbane, because you see, Babel's on one side of Papua New Guinea, Brisbane's on the other side of Papua New Guinea, and the Aborigines who made these small baskets were in between, but only in a tiny region. So we'll be talking about some of the mysteries of the dispersion of people from Babel, which brings us up to our need to have a biblical framework. So Steve, would you like to read us Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 to 9, and keep in mind what Steve mentions? Thanks, Steve.
Okay, yep. So this is Genesis 11, 1 to 9. And now the whole earth had one language, one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth.
Thanks, Steve. That's your ancestors, my ancestors, and Diane's ancestors, who's going to bring us the next lot of items from the research mail out. Please, Diane.
Yes, we send out a regular newsletter by email, and if we can go to my slides, you can sign up for it. We'll give you the address for that at the end, but we have sent out the first one, 2025, in February, and we have a bit of ministry news about what's happening around the world in creation research, and we also keep a watching brief on what's been reported in the general science news, and we make a bit of analysis and a bit of comments and help people to see things from a biblical point of view. So this was our first newsletter, and yes, we did have an item about kangaroos, and it was about some extinct kangaroos, actually. It was a study of kangaroo teeth in the Narracourt Caves in South Australia, which is a famous fossil collection of very large animals, of megafauna, and there's been an interesting debate in Australia about why the megafauna has died out. And one of the reasons that is given is that it was all to do with climate change. They were very specialised in what they could eat, and they died out when the environment degenerated. So some scientists did an study of the teeth of these animals to see what they ate. You can tell what animals eat from looking at the sort of microscopic little scratches on their teeth. And they came to the conclusion that the kangaroos actually were eating a varied diet, and they could have coped with a changing climate. So we're left with the question, well, why did they and the other megafauna then die out? Bit of a problem. And it's an ongoing debate in Australia, because the other option is that human beings caused the problem. And that, of course, leads to, sorry, we've gone too far ahead there. There we are, back to it. Who killed them off if it was human beings? And this was a summary from the editor of the journal Science, which is an American magazine. So they're on the other side of the world, and they're not involved in this debate. But they came to the conclusion, well, their demise was not likely driven by climate change, leaving human beings as the probable cause. Well, who were the human beings? At this time, it must have been the Aborigines, because the megafauna were well and truly dead by the time any of the Europeans came exploring around Australia. And that's not a terribly environmentally friendly thing for the Aborigines to be doing. So the debate does go on. And we'll come back to that a little bit in our discussion of Aborigines and the people of Australia in the rest of the program. But our other science report was about some studies of asteroid dust. Now, there was this ambitious project where NASA sent out a space probe that actually collected some rock from an asteroid named Bennu, and they brought that back to Earth and were then able to have a look at it and analyze it chemically, and they found a complex mixture of organic molecules, and they were delighted to find 14 of the 20 amino acids that are used in proteins on Earth, and all 5 bases, that's small carbon-containing molecules that are part of DNA and RNA molecules. So they thought, oh, this is wonderful. We've discovered how life could have originated on planet Earth. It came here from outer space. However, they looked at the molecules a little bit more closely, and they found there was a problem. Amino acids come in 2 forms, left and right-handed, like mirror images. And the asteroid amino acids were an equal mixture of left and right-handed forms. And unfortunately for them, life on Earth, all the amino acids are left-handed, and no one has been able to work out how this could happen just by pure chemistry alone, if you're trying to explain the origin of life simply by natural processes. And one of the scientists said he was a bit disappointed because it sort of invalidated 20 years of his research. But that's why we explore and learn new things. So it's good that he feels optimistic, but I'm sorry, being an astrobiologist, you're somewhat doomed to disappointment, because that's not how life evolved on Earth. In fact, that's where it didn't come from at all. We know that because we know the real history of the world. And Nature News, which is one of the science sources, news sources that we look at, made this comment, which I thought was quite apt. Now researchers have to go back to the drawing board to understand how life might have been seeded on Earth. Well, I would suggest that involved in going back to the drawing board, they should go and read the Bible, because that was written by the one who did actually put life on the Earth, and they might not be disappointed if they started there. So if you would like all the references for any of these items, they are archived on one of our websites, the Creation Fact File. You don't need to know when the original report was sent out. They are archived as separate items, and you can just do a topical keyword search and you'll find them. We also had a new question for our question and answer site, which is simply called Ask John Mackay. And it was an interesting question. It was about these. Do anyone recognize these? Well,
I,
John,
belie-
you must
I believe it's a
recognise
plant, Diane.
your garden.
Is it a
Right,
fig?
Are they
they're
figs?
fig leaves. Yes, that's right. And so the question was about fig leaves. Written by someone who obviously had a rather skeptical attitude. This is our little brief summary of the actual question. We have to shorten them. They're usually a bit verbose when they're sent into the website. But anyway, this was the sense of the question. How could Adam and Eve make loincloths from fig leaves without the materials, tools, and knowledge? The implication being, well, they wouldn't have known how to weave or how to sew or make needles or things like that. So we do have an answer to that based on what we are told in the Bible. So you can look that up if you go to askjohnmackay.com, and you'll find relevant scriptures as well as our answer to that question. If you'd like to receive this newsletter, as I said in the beginning, it is free. But you do need to sign up for it on our main website, which is creationresearch.net. So if we can come back to us now, if anyone has any questions, or maybe we can have, do we have any questions from anyone, from any viewers, or any thank yous, or anything to add to that before we go back to our main topic?
Unfortunately, we've had no questions or comments or thank yous come in, but I would like to add on to the piggyback of that, Diane, that we've made it easy peasy for everyone to sign up for the newsletters, as I put up earlier in the program. If you have a smartphone, all you need to do is open your camera, and then you could just hover your camera over that QR code on the left-hand side of the screen there, and that will pop up a little link. You tap that, and that will take you to where you can sign up to our newsletters, or you can go to linkedin.bio/creation research, and we've got all of our links on there relating to our museums, where to sign up to the newsletters, etc., and our fact file and Ask John Mackay site as well. So it really is sort of like the one-stop shop to go for all of our relevant links. So please do sign up. It is free, and it keeps you up to date with everything to do with creation research, and also you get answers to some of the main news items that are in the news in the most recent few weeks.
Oh, that's great, Sam. Thank you for that.
I've got a question I'd like to ask Craig. Given your report, Craig, you mentioned cabbage top pines, correct?
Celery top.
Celery top, I mean, yeah. Okay. Well, celery, cabbage, you know, us non-botanists who don't play with trees all day. But, okay, what was the environment it was growing in?
Well, it's very wet and cold up in there, and it mostly occurs in the wetter areas of Tassie. Yep.
Okay, so does it grow in swamps or around swamps or anything like that?
Not so much swamps, no, just moist gullies.
Right. Now, the reason I ask is having done quite a lot of digging in the brown coal fields of Victoria, one of the things that's interesting is in the brown coal, you find both the coal, which is made largely of bark and pollen, and you find the trees, usually fairly whole trees. So the brown coal is largely fermented wood rather than what we think of in terms of normal coal. But it's fairly easy to recognize many of these trees, and it includes celery top pines, right? So you find that the pine families are very strongly represented in Australian coal seams, and yet you go there and they'll tell you this was a swamp 40 million years ago. But you just said, see, like in Queensland, we have plenty of pine trees, but they don't like their feet being wet, and they are also well represented in the coal fields, both the black coal as well as the brown coal. And you would agree that the celery top pines don't grow in swamps?
Absolutely not.
Good. Okay. So the reason I say that is that one of the best things that God tells us to do is to test things, check things out. And yet most students at university will just believe what the professor tells them. I still remember going out on a field trip with the University of Queensland, and we stood at an old coal seam, and the professor asked, "Now, who can tell me what sort of environment was this?" Up went one of the students' hand. "Reducing environment. How do you know? There's coal here." "What does that tell you?" "It was a swamp." Now, in reality, he didn't give you any evidence at all. He just repeated the story the professor had told him, and they went round and round in circles, patting him on the back for that, and yet that's absolute rubbish. If you had a look at the fossils, the pine bark, the pine trees told you one thing: it never was a swamp. If it never was a swamp, then you get trees from, well, what was the elevation of that celery top pine, Craig?
Well, the ones we were looking at were sort of over 800 metres, 700 or 800 metres, but they do occur in lower areas as well in Tassie. But right. I've also got the local university publication on it just to confirm. It says that it's widespread in the west of the state in rainforest and as an understory in wet eucalypt forests, both of which are definitely not swamp environments.
No, that's good. So hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Our stand is to go first with God's word, which tells us the world started out perfect, then sin, and then Noah's flood, and the world changed radically temperature-wise, climate-wise after the flood. And that's our framework because God was there. The swamp and millions of years of evolution is man's framework from scientists who weren't there. Anybody else got any questions if the audience doesn't have any of what's been done so far?
Well, I was thinking in the same line when Diane was talking about the Bennu asteroid with the amino acids, like the guy that spent 20 years of his career just feels like he's wasted it. Well, he's going to waste the next 20 years if he keeps looking for the origins of life in places like asteroids. I mean, it's just really highlights the fact that if your worldview is starting in the wrong place, you will waste your time in science and looking for life on Mars. All the scientists involved in that, they are wasting their time because it doesn't evolve.
Yep, good point, but not a popular one. Okay, before I get Steve to read that passage again, I'm going to this time show you a couple of different items. Get Steve to read the Genesis 11 verses 1 to 9. And my first object is something we read about in the Bible. That's a brick, by the way, one that I made quite a lot of my fences around the property in. It's a brick made of baked clay. This one has got holes in it. Now, as a student, I used to work as a bricklayer's apprentice, and my job was to mix the concrete, the mortar that went into those holes that enabled the whole brick fence to stay together. And the interesting thing is I earned good money, but I tell you what, boy, was it hard work, picking up the bricks, passing them to the bricklayer, and mixing up all the concrete, getting them up whenever he ran out. Now, bricks made of clay. Here's pottery that's made of clay. And remember, we started with that. It's spelled Jawn, the Jarwin basket, only found in North Queensland. But here's the interesting thing we're going to be talking about. The Aborigines never had bricks in Australia. The Aborigines never had clay pots. They did have pots, bags made of lawyer cane. Steve, read us that Bible reading again, please.
Yep, all nine verses. All right, so now the earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they have all one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth.
As I said before, my uncle used to own a cane farm up there and had Aborigines who were workers for him. So I got pretty familiar with both of those things. But remember, this basket here is most unusual. Look at its odd shape, a dicorn structure made of lawyer cane, not made anymore. The group of Aborigines who made it have either stopped it or else they've died out. Take your pick. It's hard to say at the moment. But in reality, the one thing those Aborigines did not have was one of these. You like our bow and arrow? Now, recently, we've had some great donations. It's a bit hard to show you how this works in my bow, but you wouldn't want this going through you. I guess if you wanted to catch a fish, all those barbs are very, very handy. But in reality, the Aborigines in Australia would make beautiful baskets, which they'd use for carrying things around. They make them big enough sometimes to carry their children in them, but they never had bows and arrows, and they didn't have pottery. In fact, they didn't make anything out of clay. Now, Steve, what does it say in Genesis 11 that the people at Babel made out of clay? Bricks. Okay. We still do it in Australia. That's a holy brick. Very handy having those holes, because when I was a kid, even my dad would use bricks, but we only had a sort of an indented surface, so they didn't hold as strongly. But the holy brick, which is an improvement, you can actually get the concrete to go right through. And I even cheated because I used reinforced iron bits to poke down through the holes. And so my fences were almost non-negotiable except with a bulldozer or a big tree which fell on them. So take your pick. So when you look at the technology, one of the interesting things about Babel is that it says the Lord God came down and the people were judged. They were judged because you may remember God told Noah and his family to spread out and fill all the earth. So they decided to build a trade union headquarters, and they used clay for bricks and they used bitumen for mortar. Now, if you go to the old Google Maps, I'm not sure if it's there anymore, but I actually photographed the page to prove they used to have it. They used to have a big empty hole there, square-shaped one, called the Tower of Babel, the base of it. And then it said, good for children, educational. I don't know whether Google still admits to this sort of stuff, but in reality, it used to be displayed on the maps. And what's interesting, if you just go over to the river on the west side of it, there's some of the best bituminous muds, asphalt, clay muds that have got a lot of oily bitumen residues in. You use that sort of clay, and your bricks would be really tough to move. Sometimes today you'll see builders getting tubes of asphalt and specially using it to waterproof any gaps in the rocks, and it's really tough stuff. It's not nice to get on your hands either. But the Bible says we had the technology at Babel to not just make the clay bricks. Clay, by the way, is an interesting chemical, and you've got to get it to the right temperature. Some of you have done potting, and you know that you take the soft clay, particularly stuff with a lot of aluminium clays in it and kaolin, and you shape it on a wheel while it's nice and soft, and then you will bake it. Now, if you only bake it to 100 degrees, it won't go hard. You have to get it to a certain degree, because after that, the clay changes structure and all the actual clay molecules will interlink. That's why it stays hard. So when you have a look at coals, the coal fields we've been talking about, the coals in Victoria with all of those nice celery top pines in, you will find that those coals don't have any clay in. The coals in Newcastle have plenty of clay in, and so therefore we can tell the ones with clay in what temperature they got to. So no coal seam that we know of actually got to be higher than the temperature that clay goes solid. They were all lower temperature ones, about the temperature of a pile of grass. You didn't know clay could be used for that, did you? But you see, at Babel, they knew how to take clay, they knew how to fire it, they knew how to get that asphalt out, the mortar, and build big towers, which means they had engineering skills. Don't be surprised. The biblical picture is their great-great-grandfather Noah was actually still there. He had the technology for building huge ocean liners. No, he never went to boat school. God gave him the instructions, and he still had a brilliant mind compared to us, because he'd lived for hundreds of years before the flood, and he'd learned a thing or two. Diane, do you remember when the Bible says we got the use of metal? When
Well,
was
it
the first?
actually goes back to before the flood.
Uh-huh.
There's a list of Cain's descendants in Genesis, and it describes metalworking, and very highly technical metalworking, because they made musical instruments. So forging, which is manipulating metal to make various tools and implements, and metal for making musical instruments, which requires a lot of technical ability, and it's all there before the flood in the early generations.
It is, but if you come to Australia, you'll find that the Aborigines not only didn't have bows and arrows, they not only couldn't make bricks or didn't make bricks, they had no farms and they had no metal tools. They didn't use metal at all. Now, I was talking to an old Aboriginal elder from the Northern Rivers, and he said, when we first came to this country, three brothers in their boats, we landed on this beach just around Evans Head, and then we went up into the hills and we found the spirits, and we began to worship them. After that, we forgot how to use metal. You see, all the things we know about the Aborigines, they came from places like India, where they still have metal today, and they had it, they brought it with them. You see, they too came from the Tower of Babel. In India, they had bows and arrows. When you have a look at the technology they had, the sad, hard thing to come to grips with is the Australian Aborigines have left Babel and they've lost information. Now, they're not the only ones to do this. I've travelled all over the world, and I found it very interesting to say, well, if the people in Papua New Guinea could make pots like this, how about the people in New Zealand? Well, when the Europeans first arrived in New Zealand, there was no clay potting. One simple reason, you see the Maoris, have you noticed they've got a slightly Asiatic look? They come from the south area of China, that's where they departed. And as they boat hopped out into the Pacific Ocean, some of them went north and became the Hawaiians, some of them went south and became the New Zealand people. That's why their religion and their gods are so similar, as well as a lot of their language. But as they island hopped, what was interesting is most of the islands they went to were made of coral, no clay. So by the time they got from one end to the other, they had lost the ability to make clay pots. So you can lose information that because there's no resources. But the Aborigines arrived in a country where there was plenty of clay, and they never used pottery at all. Though, and I believe there's one example supposedly of a mullock heap with broken bits of clay in it. Is that correct? Have I got that right?
Yes, yes. A mullock heap is basically a midden or a rubbish dump, and so there are broken pieces of pottery. But as far as I know, there's only one of them.
Okay, and it's not been traced to the Aborigines because the ones in the north, the traders who came here, Indonesians, right?
Yeah.
They bought pottery with them, but it never caught on in Australia. Now, you've got to ask yourself why. Now, I don't mean to offend anybody, but sometimes the truth offends us all. And I nearly got myself into trouble on Sunday because we were talking out at a chapel on Sunday morning, and my assistant, my young man we were training, was Josiah, and he's like Joe. He's a young version of Joe, if you can imagine that. He's a reptile man. He's really good with animals. But I've had to tell him he's not allowed to bring snakes to church. And he does it, right? He brings pictures of them. He'll talk about them. But you see, what's interesting is there was an Aboriginal man in the audience, and I explained that we were taking all of these things for our latest displays. We were looking at a display, and we've called it Left Behind at Babel, or Left Behind After Babel, because you need to realize that if you have a group of people, now you can call it genetically a stop of people. There's a genetic stop there because they're all in one place and then they split up. So what you've got is an information clutter as well. People could build bricks, people could make towers, people would collect bitumen, people would have to grow their crops, feed the takreds, etc. But when God separated those people, then actually when you leave, you can't take all the information with you. Now, most Christians never think through the implications of Babel. So if you had been a family who was responsible for making the clay bricks at Babel, you haven't been growing wheat for 50 years. You haven't been learning to make bread. All the cooks do that. So if you have to leave, you leave with less knowledge than the whole had. If you were one of the metal workers, then you may be good at mining copper, you may be good at shaping it, but you can't grow stuff for making clothes for love nor money. So whenever you get a dispersal, particularly one that's imposed by God, you get an information decline. So there's the starting point. And this older Aboriginal man was listening carefully and not too happy with some of the things I said, because I said, okay, you get from there to Australia. Okay, what happened in between? Well, some of you know that we have a fair bit of controversy over things like our smoking ceremonies. We have a very left-wing government in many places, and they want to pay tens of thousands for the Aborigines to do their welcome to country smoking ceremony, in which you're supposed to blow the smoke over yourself with leaves, breathe it in to become part of country. Now, when you look at this, actually, it's a demonic thing. It really is. I'm not being nasty, I'm being factual. When the missionaries first arrived in my homeland, my people were into the demonic, right? That's the ancestral Scots. My people would kill their babies on the 31st of October. That's where Halloween comes from. So we had to deal with this ourselves. But when the Aborigines got here and they took the stories of Babel, they took the stories of the flood, they took all of those and they adapted them to their own benefits. And we've told you before that the story of Ayers Rock, now known as Uluru, involves a big serpent who actually rescued people, and all 8 of them ended up on top of the rock, and they are the first people, the First Nations. Now, did you catch what happened there? The hero was the serpent. Recently, I watched a program done for the Aborigines, but it involved them all standing around and beating this big serpent to invoke it to come to them, right? Now, when you have a look at what's happened to the Aborigines, as they've left Babel, they not only lost technology, and they've seemed to have lost more and more of it, but they've arrived in Australia and their chief spirit is the serpent. Now, do you get the connection now between what we did at the assembly on Sunday and what we're talking about now? Young Josiah was talking about victory over the serpent. The serpent in the Bible is Satan. Satan has always been out to belittle God and to destroy man. And God actually warns us that if we follow his ways and worship him, elevate him, leave God out of our knowledge, then God himself will hand us over to foolishness. Now, you realize the implications of that? It doesn't matter whether you're ancestral Scots or ancestral Aborigines or whatever. The further down you go, the further away from God, the more you worship the serpent, the more you are handing yourself into his hands and losing knowledge. So you wondered why the Aborigines didn't have pottery? Well, they left Babel with it. Do you wonder why they didn't have bricks? Well, they left Babel with it. Can you see now why our new display left behind after Babel is going to be pretty provocative? Because the only way the missionaries could get through to my ancestors was by telling them the truth about their sacred trees. There's nothing sacred about a tree. They're beautiful, God made them, but you don't worship trees. To do that is to insult the real creator and to actually serve the serpent, serve Satan. And the missionaries had to tell us, stop, you've got to do that. Now, I'm bold enough to even tell old Aboriginals who are in my congregation, hey, listen, you've got the wrong end of the stick. Because he came to me afterwards and he said, I nearly walked out on what you said. Wonder why? Because you see, I'll show you one more bit of evidence. That's from New Guinea. Isn't that beautiful? You realise Aborigines didn't do that? They could, but they didn't. They didn't make any beautiful decorated clothing or anything like that. Grass bits and pieces, sometimes animal furs, but they didn't go to the quality that's there. Now, when you have a look, this older Aboriginal man, bless his heart, and glad he wants to come and be at church, but you need to tell people the whole truth. He came up to me and he said, I nearly walked out on you. And I said, what was your problem? And he said, well, you Europeans came to Australia and you stole our children. And I said, well, hang on a moment. I said, I talked to some rather important Aboriginal people about that. And some of you won't like hearing what I'm about to say. But the old Aboriginals I've talked to said, in our family, they came to see us, but they didn't steal anybody. If our parents wanted us to go and be educated, we could. I thought, given who just told me that, a rather famous Aboriginal actor, then I've got to reconsider this. And then I actually talked to him and I said, here's what was told to me. I told him that story. And then I said, what about your family? He said, well, no one had stolen from my family either. What you said happened to my family. They came and asked us, did we want the children educated? So when I got home, I rang Diane. And Diane, what did you tell me about an example in your area down in Canberra, the capital of Australia?
Well, it wasn't actually from Canberra. It was when I visited a exhibition in Alice Springs, and one of the Aboriginal people there said that he was glad that the white people actually gave him an education because that enabled him to get a good job and make a good life for himself.
Okay, now can I encourage you? We've given you interesting bits and pieces. We've showed you some beautifully crafted, well, I guess you can call them arrows, none of which existed in Aboriginal culture. We've showed you bows and arrows, none of which existed in Aboriginal culture, even though they existed in India, where there are dingoes and people who use boomerangs. We've showed you bricks, none of which existed in Australia. We showed you pottery, which were in New Guinea only a day's canoe ride across from Australia. But we've also told you about their worship of Satan. Now, do you want to reach Aboriginal people or people of any culture? Tell them the whole story from beginning to end, from Genesis through to Revelation. That's what young Josiah did. He talked all about how Satan, used the serpent. And we talked all about leg loss, which is in the Bible, by the way, and shows in the fossils of snakes. We talked all about how Satan was defeated at the cross and how victory over the serpent is possible. But you see, you can't keep banging the serpent. You can't keep breathing demons in. You can't keep saying that this is important stuff. No, those are the things that my people had to leave behind. And I'd encourage any of you who've got Aboriginal blood. It usually costs you a lot of culture to actually become a Christian and have a total Christian worldview. I'm going to leave it there because I've been provocative enough. There's lots of other things we've been given, but pray for our museums because we do try to be as delicate as possible, as sensible as possible, but as obvious as possible. Our new display, we're left behind at Babel, deals with Aborigines, deals with New Guinea people, all of this in order to tell people the truth, that they are descended from those who actually left Babel and they arrived in Australia by canoe, by boat. They lived in North Queensland. And even when Captain James Cook arrived, who's sort of given the bad guy of colonialism view at the moment, I'll tell you what, you actually have a real issue because the Aborigines had no problem with Captain Cook up in North Queensland. You know why not? They knew Captain Cook spoke a different language, but I've collected from that area, from the elders and from Dr. Alan Hall, who was the man who was given his government order of Australia for helping the Aborigines reconstruct their own language. They had a story about how once we all spoke the same language, and then we all had a big party around a big lagoon, and something went wrong. We woke up next morning and we couldn't understand one another, and so we all wandered away. Captain Cook must be one of those lot. That they understood because they already had the evidence that the Bible was true from the very beginning. Okay, back to the general audience. Anyone in our team got any questions from that? I see one coming out there from Craig.
I don't know if Craig's got a question, but I just say the audience has increased. So just to say to anyone that's watching, do add your question, put a Q and your question in the chat. We'll have a few more minutes just to say if we get them in quick, we might be able to answer them. We've got a few Australians coming online. We've got someone that's saying they're from the Gabba. I don't know if there's a game on tonight. I don't know if you know that, but they're watching from the game if that's if there's one on. But if you've got a question, do put it in the chat.
One comment I've got is that it's probably important for us to add that the Aboriginal people had some incredible skills, particularly in survival and using bush medicines and hunting and finding water where people can't find it and tracking people. I mean, probably still today they use Aboriginal trackers because they're so incredibly clever. It's just they perhaps retained those sorts of skills and lost some of these other ones. So perhaps one of their biggest problems, John, you can comment more on this, but perhaps one of their biggest problems is that they didn't take writing with them. So some of these other ideas they couldn't record and then read later and train others and educate others with a sort of formal schooling. Because we even know that the Sumerians had universities where they, transcribed things onto rock and perhaps other things as well. and trained their younger people, and therefore the education increased from there. But the Aboriginals missing out on that, couldn't record, couldn't train, couldn't teach, but retained other skills.
Yes. Having been involved in a lot of bushcraft myself over the years, running survival clubs, I've been to many areas where the Aborigines' knowledge of medicine was ahead of the Europeans. Up on the Darling Downs, there's a very old coal mine which I'd actually gone to see because there was a record just in the sort of literature around the area that many years ago they'd found a pair of shoes size 8 left and right in the coal. Right, so I went to interview the people who were still alive because this coal mine had been closed for 50 years. So I went there, and the old manager is still alive. So I asked him, and he said, yes, we had them on display there until the Queensland Museum came and picked them up. And then I said, is there any other workers alive? He said, yeah, there's old Bob down the corner. So I went and checked with Bob, and he verified, yeah, we had a pair of shoes, and that they were, you could put your feet in them. And the Queensland Museum took them. And it was interesting that when I had, at that time, one of our people was working in the Queensland Museum, I said, go through your archives and see if you can find any record of these shoes. And he went all through, and he said, there's no evidence that any shoes that this geologist collected were ever accepted into the museum. I mentioned that because I've noticed that trend, leave evidence out if it doesn't fit your evolutionary worldview. But getting onto the medicine side, as I explored that old coal seam where they hadn't been mining it, I came across a lovely cliff face, not too high, but around the edge of a stream, and there was a whole layer of yellow powder. Right now, some of you may know that the sort of coal you don't want is coal that's full of sulfur. But the Aborigines would dig this coal out, and they would actually swallow sulfur as a medicine. Now, Diane, you're our medical brains here. What had they just discovered?
Well, sulfur is used as an antibiotic, as an antiseptic. Yes.
Okay, now, when I checked with the Aboriginal records, they'd only gone and ate that when they had sniffles and colds in wintertime, right? They needed an antibiotic of some sort. And so pat them on the back. They had found almost at the edge of sulfonamides, way ahead of the Europeans. So you've got to take both sides, as Craig said, and rightly. And that's why when we put up our museum displays, we try to do that. But one of the things you can pray for, we need sometimes someone to come in full time as much as possible to our museum, because Craig, you've got people who volunteer and the museum works well there. We've got very few volunteers who can come in our Queensland, our newest museum. Steve, you work in the British Museum pretty well full time, correct, don't you? At Oswestry?
Yeah, 3 days a week. I'm around there usually.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think we've covered that one enough. Anyone else got any other questions?
I think it's important to understand that the history of technology, once again, is the very opposite of what the Bible tells us. So the Bible tells us that people didn't start out as hunter-gatherers and gradually gain technology. In fact, they started out as gardeners and farmers, and they had high-tech metalworking and artistic skills, and they've gone downhill. And that is the very opposite of the evolutionary story about sort of cave people coming down from the trees, going into caves, being hunter-gatherers, and gradually acquiring technology. So there is a mismatch between the evolutionary story of human culture and the biblical story of human culture. So you do have to make a choice as to who you believe. And of course, there was only one who was there for the whole of that history. And so we need to go back to that record.
And as I keep telling people, from the oldest records I've got of the Aborigines, they arrived here with stories that match Babel, with stories that match creation, with stories of death coming. with stories of the original people living in a beautiful environment, with stories of death coming as a result of disobedience to the Creator. They may have the wrong names, they may have the story facts mismatched, but no more so than most people who grow up reading myths and legends today. So the evidence is there, and you just have to point it out. So pray for these projects. Sorry, Steve, Craig.
The Pleiades of the Seven Sisters, they had the same stories for the same star signs as the ancient Greeks and the North American Indians.
They sure did. They sure did indeed. Well, Steve, back to you. I think we're done there, unless there's any more thank yous, Sam.
A few questions there.
There's no thank yous, but we do have some
there's a
questions.
couple of questions. They're not.
But the person who would answer those is Joe. He's not here tonight. So thank you for the questions, but we'll wait till Joe comes back.
All right.
Okay.
Great. Any other comments before we close? Then I think thank you all for joining, and thank you for those that have joined in a bit later in the game. But it's great to see you come online and answer some questions. Do check out in future for future calls. We're not sure. This is not a settled time for us in terms of creation conversations. We were running at different times for a long time, and then we've come to this time for a period in terms of the live call. Though things might change, just watch out for our YouTube channel and see when the next call will come online. But we'll try and get to those questions in future.
We could possibly answer the question on the dinosaur feathers that Joel Ozzie has asked.
Oh, okay, you can then, Greg, because you've done a lot of the work on that.
Well, a little bit. Okay. It's just a fairly simple answer, because any researcher findings on the supposed feathers on dinosaur fossils is there's never been any feathers found on dinosaur fossils. There's, in terms of complex feathers, branched feathers, they've only ever been found on fossils that are ancient birds, ancient and modern birds for that matter, but never on dinosaurs. So Diane might add a little bit more to that. It's all It's all built around speculation and the evolutionary mindset and worldview that underpins their approach to interpreting the evidence of the fossils. But they've never found feathers, branched feathers, complex feathers on a dinosaur fossil.
No, that's right. There are no true feathers on anything that is considered to be a dinosaur. We do have a question on the Ask site about that, and we've written about a few examples in our fact file. What they have found are some sort of fibrous-looking materials, and even some evolutionists are skeptical about that and say it's just part of the degradation of the skin when the particular animal was buried. So no feathers on real dinosaurs. There are some funny-looking creatures which are different to modern-day birds that do have feathers, but the most famous of these is one called Sinosauropteryx. But if you look into the story of that, was considered to be one of the ones that had just these fibers on its back, not proper feathers. The ones that do have proper feathers are considered to be birds, even by the evolutionists.
Yeah, they might have funny things like teeth as well, and bony tails. Their bony tails are never as long as the bony tails of true dinosaurs. But these are things that have been lost. The claws on the wings, but if you look closely enough, there's a lot of modern birds with claws on the wings still. So they just don't have the bone structures to enable them to fly. And there's a whole bunch of very conflicting things within the concept of dinosaurs evolving feathers, because some say that they evolved feathers on running dinosaurs that ran along the ground, and others say that they evolved feathers on different creatures that for different purposes, like insulation and so on. But they have no real idea of why they would evolve feathers and how they would then generate flight from that. So there's no research that's really helping them greatly.
All right.
It is an important thing that it's touching on, okay, the question is asking about specific research, but obviously we go back to the Bible, and we go back to what we were sharing, what we believe is from the Bible. We can know that the whole thing about feathers is because this theory or this idea or this story that dinosaurs are currently in the world because they're birds. This is a false story, isn't it? Because it doesn't stack with the Bible. Dinosaurs were created along with all the mammals and land creatures on day 6, but birds were created before, on a previous day. So we know they haven't come from that. If we believe the Bible, we believe it's truth. But it's really interesting to keep an eye out, keep a watch out, especially if you've got children, on some of the things that come up. My son was just literally watching a YouTube video the other day, which was just a quiz. What are these dinosaurs? Name the dinosaurs. And I caught him watching it, and we were going through it, guessing the dinosaurs. And what dinosaur is this? And it was an Archaeopteryx. And I was like, yeah, that's not a dinosaur, is it? It's a bird. So we really we can't always see what they're watching all the time, but it's good if we can just try and input into what they're seeing and just correct.
Well, literally, these days they put a picture of a seagull up or a pelican or something and call that a dinosaur. That's how ridiculous it's got.
Yeah.
They're literally saying that modern birds are dinosaurs in the museums.
Just to add,
and in children's books, I've seen that as well.
Just to add one comment to encourage our New Zealand watcher there, Alan, you're quite right about Les's book and catalogue of Australian stuff, particularly the medicine, and my survival techniques, and that come a lot from some of the military books and that are available to the special services. But don't be surprised at that, because in the beginning all the plants were very good, and one of the things you'll learn if you stay listening long enough is we are emphatic that God made the world very good. Don't blame him for anything bad. We chose to sin and our bodies went downhill, but so did the plants and the animals. So these days you can still eat a lot of plants if you know about them, but you've got to be real careful because they've gone downhill as well. So just because the parrot drinks or eats a certain plant, don't you just follow it because it can tolerate 80 times more strychnine than you can. So you have to learn things like that if you want to survive in the bush as well. But originally, the world was very good. And again, it's an encouragement. Look at God's history of the world, good to bad to worse. And then Jesus came, and it's still continuing to degrade on the planet, but a new promise of eternity with the Lord Jesus Christ in a world where everything is very good. And I'll be honest, I'm looking forward to that, to be with Jesus and have things that are very good. No thorns on the roses, no presidents fighting over other countries, all sorts of interesting things. So it'll be a wonderful time to be there. So back to you to finish off, Steve.
I was just going.
Great. Well,
I was just going to add a great example of the Aboriginal skill in bush foods is the macrosomia, where white man was completely unfamiliar with the plant, and it kills you. But the Aboriginals knew how to cook it in a way that made it edible. So they had skills that the white man didn't, for example, in surviving in the Australian environment.
Soak for 3 weeks first. Yeah, I know. Not a slow food.
Not fast food, that one.
Not fast food, no.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think we're wrapping up for this evening, for today, depending on where you are. But thank you very much for all the team for joining in and sharing all the information that we've had. And thank you for those that have watched and have joined us online. We'll catch you again in the next Creation Conversations. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
God bless.